a few words about this course. I have structured in a very practical way. So the idea is that, by the end of this course, we're going to know a lot about the theory of data journalism, but most importantly, a lot about the tools that you can use for, data journalism purposes. So, for example, today we start with an introduction. I will showcase some projects. I will showcase the methodology behind these projects. I'll talk a little bit about the data journalism workflow. And then from the second and to the third sessions, we're going to make together interactive charts and interactive maps. So we're going to use a tool called Data Wrapper that is free of charge. You can basically just open the website of Data Wrapper and use it. We're going to do that together next week and the week after next. And then finally, we're going to do like a wrap-up session where we basically recap the whole thing and then talk about ways to optimize data visualizations. We'll talk about how charts and maps can lie, because you can visualize data and basically say lies. It's absolutely possible. Sometimes we visualize something and the message that comes across is completely wrong. So the last session will be mostly about how charts can be basically visualized correctly in order to tell the right message. And yeah, so let's get started. Introduction. So who am I? Well, I mean, Catherine was very nice and it already introduced me. I told you I'm a data journalist. I work between Europe and Africa. So I've been doing a lot of projects around the fields of journalism, technology, and design. So data journalism is a little bit of an intersection between multiple disciplines. We're going to see that together. I've been working in this intersection over the last, I think, almost 12 years, because I started right away after my studies. I studied computer science. And after my studies, I fell in love with journalism. And I started doing data journalism projects, because it was then a natural way to move from technology to the media. We're talking about 2011, 2012, when data journalism was a completely new category of thoughts, especially in Europe. And I started immediately to produce projects, initially in Italy. And then I moved to Berlin, where I worked for a few years, and I produced some projects in Europe in multiple languages. Most of them were funded by the European Journalism Center, the EJC, which I highly recommend to check out if you have time, because they are very active in the data journalism landscape. After a short experience in Berlin, I started working in Africa with this media NGO called Code for Africa, which is, among other things, producing data journalism projects in the African continent. So I get to work with journalists from a lot of different countries, for example, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, and a few others. So as you can read on this slide, basically my career has been a little bit international. I worked on projects as a freelancer and published on media like, for example, El País, The Correspondent, Internazionale, Al Jazeera, and a few others. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Instead of talking about me, I prefer to talk about projects, because projects are the way I basically practice this profession. And one of my favorite projects that was made in 2015 and then continued for a few years is called the Migrants Files. Maybe some of you already know it, or maybe not. In any case, it's a transnational project about migration. So we were a bunch of data journalists from multiple countries. I think we are talking about 15 countries in Europe, including Greece. So we had Italian journalists, Spanish, Portuguese, Greek, and then French, German, Swedish, working together to describe this phenomenon, which is a human tragedy, by the way. It's the death of migrants. And this, like, Italy and Greece see this on the news all the time. Some other countries don't have the same exposure to this phenomenon, but all the countries in Europe are basically on the forefront. Some more, like Italy and Greece, others a bit less. But anyways, the flows of migration continue, after the people get to the shores in the south of Europe. And we decided to do a project to basically describe this phenomenon using data. And the intuition was, we have a lot of data in every country about deaths of migrants, but each data set we find is not just focusing on one single country or a small region of Europe. This was like more than 12 years ago. There were no open data portals taking the entire statistics and published in open data format. There was nothing like that. There were a lot of small fragmented data sets. We decided to take all of them and merge them together into one single database and make this database available to the public. The database was also visualized on an interactive map, the one that you see on the screen in this slide, but it was also used to publish a campaign of stories in different languages, all synchronized in the same day to make as much impact as possible. And we got to basically publish over 20 stories. We had a lot of coverage from other media who relaunched the Migrants Files. And finally, this project was used by the United Nations, in particular by IOM, which is the International Organization for Migrations, to launch a new website called Missing Migrants, which you can find online. It still exists. So what I'm saying here is that a small data journalism project, because I'm talking about a small grant, I mean, for us was a lot of people and an incredible experience, but the overall grant was below $10,000 or 10,000 euros. So a small project basically triggered some change in the United Nations. So that kind of impact made us very happy. And the Missing Migrants project still exists. The Migrants Files were mentioned on international papers, were used as a source by the United Nations. And, we love the impact of it. So that's why I'm starting, talking about data journalism by showing you a project like this one. It's still online. So if you go on migrantsfiles.com, you can find the entire investigation there and all the data. So yeah, this was like one of the most important projects I worked when I started this. And it was funded by a body called journalismfund.eu. So in case you want to do a transnational project like this one, you can go on journalismfund.eu and download, for example, new grants, or download new forms that you can fill to apply for new funding, so on and so forth, and also see all the projects that won the grants in the past. Let's fast forward a little bit. I made another project using an open data portal called Global Forest Watch. Global Forest Watch is an initiative by the World Resource Institute that collects open data about the state of forests in the world. So let's say that there is a forest in Brazil or in Europe or in Indonesia that is being cut down and destroyed to extract resources. Global Forest Watch will report it into the database. And journalists can use Global Forest Watch to tell data journalism stories. Local stories, for example, they can focus on the place they live, or they can just go very broad and talk about deforestation in the world. And we made a small project in the Congo Basin in Central Africa, where we trained a number of journalists to use Global Forest Watch and revisualize it for their own purposes. And some of the techniques that we use for this project are the techniques that we're going to see together. So, for example, tools like Data Wrapper were used, and techniques on how to extract a story from data were used. Data cleaning techniques also were necessary, and a few others. So yeah, in case you like this topic, I think you can go on globalforestwatch.org and find more about that. Obviously, this slide is mostly about the idea that data journalism doesn't have to exclude reportage. So the best, in my opinion, comes out when you combine data with human stories. So you're not just visualizing data and publishing some charts and some maps, but you are combining the data with human stories, with interviews, with videos. And we try to do that also in the Congo Basin. And a few reportages were published just about 3 years ago. And if you go on this link here, you can basically see the full long form multimedia reportage that included first-hand evidences, like interviews of rangers and people who live in the forest. And then, Global Forest Watch data from other sources, visualized, satellite images, and a few other things all together combined. So I think some of you, this is an assumption, some of you are doing more traditional journalism, like going on the ground, for example, meeting with people, interviewing them, filming, taking photos. What I want to say is that you can continue doing that and then include the data into your workflow. So don't see data journalism as something that will replace what you're doing, but see it as something complementary that can be incorporated into your workflow. Data obviously can be useful to analyze budgets, like public budgets, the way the taxpayers' money is spent. You can do that basically by downloading the huge amount of data that you find online, for example, on Eurostat, and then try to extract stories from there and make it understandable to the larger audience. We did the same experiments in Africa, where there is an issue of lack of data, or the data is very, very hidden into PDF files. So what we try to do, we democratized the access to data. This was in Kenya through this project that you see on this slide. But the same can be done in Europe to a certain extent. Analyzing the budgetary data is very interesting. And it's something that we can do with the techniques that we're going to see together over the next few weeks. There are some more experimental projects that I always like to mention. I'm going to go quick because these start to be slightly off topic, but I want to mention a project that has a lot of geographic data in it. It's called Map Makoko. It is a project that Code for Africa and myself made in Nigeria. There was an area in a city called Lagos in Nigeria that it was not mapped. There was no geographic data about it. So we felt like this place was neglected, even if there were 300,000 people living in there. There was no granular geographic data about it. So having also a data journalism component in the team, we decided to fly drones in this area and collect geographic data that could be transformed into an open data map, which is now available on OpenStreetMap. This was done in cooperation with the local people who lived in this area, and it led to the publication of like 12 stories. It was also featured on urban development publications. The CNN and BBC came and covered the project. This was basically a massive impact. And the idea was that the geographic data that we collected could be used to improve the living condition of the people living in Makoko. So yeah, More projects. I used in the past data from the University of the United Nations about e-waste. I think well, I'm not going to click now on the link, but if you have time, I think you can see the recording later and then extract this link and, check the full story. This project was about electronic waste. So another environmental topic. We approached it by combining reportages and data. The idea was to map the flows of electronic waste between, waste producers like Europe, the US, or the Middle East country, and then the south of the world. So, for example, Africa or other places in India that were receiving all these flows of e-waste. And the idea was also to understand the impact of it on the environment, the impact of it on the economy, the problems and the challenges and the ways to handle all that. This project, again, used a lot of data, and it featured some interactive charts that were useful to understand the complexity of this problem. So I think you can just check it out later because we have limited time. Made a map of people who lost their lives in the Italian prisons. This was also featured on The Guardian. Problems that are common in Europe. So I believe that in other countries, the situation in the prisons is not the best. Just to use a euphemism, there are problems of disease, health, people committing suicide, drug dealing happening in the prisons, people living in overcrowded cells, that kind of problem. I tried to visualize it, and the result was an interactive map. The data was basically produced, in this case, by a local NGO. So there is a local NGO in Italy called Ristretti Orizzonti. They publish an Excel file that is very, very hidden. Nobody knows about it. Because if you open their website, it's like a small link in the website. And the problem was visibility and visualization. So I did nothing other than visualizing the data set produced by this NGO. But the result was quite astonishing because you had all the numbers aggregated together. People would be able to explore what was happening in the prison in their city and break down the data, see what kind of deaths were recorded and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes you come across a data journalism project that was published in a specific country, and you feel like, hey, this project could be done in my country. It's quite common. So I invite you to kind of take a look at data journalism projects produced by the best practitioners in Europe, because a lot of the data is available in multiple countries. So let's say that somebody like me makes this project on prisons in Italy. Maybe some person in I don't know, in Greece or in Poland or somewhere else in Europe will probably feel like, yeah, it could be useful in their country too. So we can inspire each other. That's what I'm saying. This was another project. So about youth migration in Europe, especially from south to north. So countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Italy have a lot of young migrants who, for economic reasons or for personal reasons, ambitions, or other reasons, they decide to leave their country, sometimes even after their studies, so like very young, and move to places like Germany or Norway or the UK. Well, the UK now is more complicated after Brexit, but you have Ireland, you have the Netherlands. This is still happening. Problem is that you don't have specific numbers on this because of Schengen. So Schengen allows people in Europe to move around without visa, which means that somebody like me from Italy can go tomorrow to Luxembourg and I'm not recorded anywhere. In theory, some people after a few months are required to register in the local municipality, but there is no central database with all the municipalities of Europe. So even if you are recorded in Berlin, for example, the city of Berlin will know that you're there, but nobody else will know, at least from an institutional level, that there's no common shared knowledge base about it. So the data about young migration in Europe is very vague. There are a lot of estimates, and we decided to dig into it as a team of South European journalists, and basically made a crowdsourcing campaign. So we collected a lot of stories from young migrants and tried to understand whether they register in the local municipality or not, what were the reasons why they moved to the other country. And the result of it was this project called Generation E, which you can explore on this link later. But yeah, this is a case when the data is not available and the data journalists decide to run a campaign to collect the data. And obviously, the data that you are collecting as a journalist cannot be seen as a scientific data set, but it's just a way to basically show that there is a lot of data that is not collected by anyone. So project was interesting. A lot of these projects touched on topics that are evergreen. There are still problems in our societies. And the power of data is that, once you create an infrastructure or a methodology based on data, then every year you can update your projects and relaunch them again and again and again and approach them from different angles. You can team up with other European journalists and do projects together. So it's a very versatile and very flexible tool for journalism. Any question? If not, I'm going to go to the next section, which is about key concepts of data journalism. Let's do that. So let's move to the second block. What is data journalism? I think now you already know, because I've already showed you projects. This was made on purpose. I don't like to start with like some very theoretical definition of data journalism. Also because there is not just one definition. So there was one moment in 2015, just about like 9 years ago, when data journalism was hype, that there were so many people talking about it, but very few people doing it in practice. So in my opinion, data journalism is something very tangible, and that's why I always start talking about projects immediately. Anyways, I have a few definitions for you, because I think it's important to start talking about it in a more formal way. So what's data journalism? I mean, data journalism, first of all, is journalism. It's nothing else than journalism. So the word journalism in data journalism is absolutely crucial and fundamental. You can't forget about it, because it's all about journalism. So it's journalism that leverages and uses data to tell stories. You can use it to tell an actual story, or you can use it to elevate another story. So let's talk about a scenario. We are working for a local newspaper, or maybe a podcast studio, maybe in the city of Thessaloniki, and we want to explore the problem of early school leaving. So children, boys and girls, teenagers who drop out from school, maybe even before the end of the mandatory school. So what you can do here, you can start going to maybe the outskirts of Thessaloniki and go and meet with the professors, ask them questions about this phenomenon, meet with sociologists, and ask them about questions. Psychologists, maybe decision makers, you start querying and asking questions. So you're doing journalism, right? You're going to meet with people, you interview them, do your work, and then you start having an idea of this problem. Now, how do you use data? There are two ways to use it. One is, you go and find the statistics about early school living in Greece and maybe more locally in Thessaloniki, and you start integrating the data into your podcast or your story. That's number one. So you're using it to elevate a story. The other option is, before you go to Thessaloniki, you do your preliminary research on early school living in Greece. And before going to the schools, you kind of try to understand, you explore the data, you try to understand where you have the highest rate of early school living. So you're using it in an exploratory way, and you use it as a way to guide you in the decision making, during your journalism production, before deciding where to go specifically in the area of Thessaloniki. Maybe from the data that you find, you will go to a specific zone or a specific neighborhood because you know that there is a very high rate of early school living. So you use data to conceptualize the story from the beginning instead of doing it afterwards. But both approaches are valid. Data journalism involves a blending of journalism with other fields, such as, you name it, data visualization, computer science, statistics, design, sometimes even law, or other disciplines that are extremely useful when you are doing data journalism. So, for example, the data will be downloaded in Excel, right? You go on the Statistical Institute of Greece or of Portugal, of Spain, download the data, and then you need to do a visualization. So if you have some data visualization skills or design skills, that will help you a lot. You can do it as a single individual. So you know a little bit of all these disciplines and do the project on your own. Or you can team up with other people who are strong in the fields that you're not strong in. So it's up to you to decide whether you want to learn about everything or you want to team up with people who know about other fields that you're not very familiar with. But what's important here is that data journalism is multidisciplinary. So you really need to know a little bit of design, a little bit of statistics, a little bit of computer science. I'm not talking about having a degree on each of these fields, but as you will see during the course, some notions will be very useful of each of these disciplines. So it's a highly hybrid, cross-disciplinary type of journalism. But if you think about it, journalism itself is multidisciplinary. Videos, audio, photos, text. Then you need a little bit of project management. You need a little bit of, I don't know, planning skills, logistics, security and privacy. You need to know a lot about different things. So it's not different, but it's, the disciplines that you're going to need the most are the ones you see here. So data visualization, computer science, statistics, and design. And then obviously journalism production, so the content part. And yeah, so you see here this book. This book is probably one of the most important free books about data journalism, and you can find it on the link that I shared with IQ Media, or you can just Google the title and you're gonna find it. There will be a website with all the resources, so we're gonna put them all together there. But if you want to start immediately, you just Google this title, and it's translated in multiple languages, and you're gonna find a lot of material there. So yeah, I invite you to take a look at this handbook. So again, on data journalism is a process. So it's nothing else than a process. This process starts from data. So that's the main ingredient. We talked about early school living. So early school living data can be found on Eurostat, for example. Can do that together. We can use it as a sample in one of our practical sessions. But you start from the data. So you're going to download an Excel file. You're going to download a PDF in some cases. You download a CSV file. This is the main ingredient that you will start from. This ingredient will be processed by you as a data journalist and will be turned into something valuable to the public. So after you have the data, you're going to move into the filter phase. So the filter phase is basically taking an Excel file and cleaning it and making it minimal and optimized for data visualization. So you're going to move into the data visualization phase, and the data visualization phase is basically the third step of data journalism. What's here is basically the construction of charts and maps. And sorry for the background noise. And after you have the visualizations, what you're going to do, you're going to integrate it into your story. So these four steps are the workflow of data journalism. And the more you work on the data, moving from the first phase to the second, from the second to the third, and from the third to the story, the last one, as you can see, the value to the public grows, and you're basically turning your work into a service to the public. This is what you're doing. This can also be applied to journalism in general. The more you work on a story, the better, because it's going to be more accurate, it's going to be more accessible, more interesting. You can apply the same to data journalism. So this slide comes from the founder of Data Wrapper, and Data Wrapper is the tool that we're going to use, and it's used by media like Deutsche Welle in Germany, The Guardian, a lot of them. I think also El País, a lot of other media are using Data Wrapper as a data journalism tool. And so this slide comes from Mirko Lorenz, who's the founder of Data Wrapper. This is something I've already mentioned. So just a visualization of the multidisciplinary nature of data journalism. So you're going to have multiple disciplines, design, journalism, and what's here is a developer. This is actually changing, in my opinion, especially now with AI, and developers are not necessary all the time anymore like they used to be probably 10 years ago. A lot of the work is now done by softwares. So you don't need to write code. What you need is basically a little bit of familiarity with technology rather than coding. And you can produce very impactful data journalism projects without coding. So here you see that design and journalism, in my opinion, are still very much necessary. This one developer is probably, now we can rename it into technology in general, but you don't need to be a coder anymore to make data journalism projects. Normally, when I say this, the people in the room are always like having a moment of relief, because they kind of say, okay, thankfully, I don't need to code to make data journalism. You could, but it's not necessary. Some of the most complex projects will still need a little bit of coding, but you can do amazing projects without coding. That's what I'm saying. And then finally, here, I want to show you a funny slide about the idea that data journalism projects are like whales. So they can be very small or huge. You can do a story on your own, like the one that we mentioned before about early school living. You can do it on your own. You just go as a journalist and you basically do your story, and then you integrate some data into it. That can be done as a single individual. But there are some projects like the ones I showed you when I started that are larger and need a team to be produced. So those could be seen like the largest whales here. The largest one here on the top left of the poster, that would be something like the Panama Papers that you may have heard of. That actually had a team of 100 people, probably more than 100. It was coordinated by ICIJ, Consortium on Investigative Journalism. There was a data team, and then there was this network of journalists that received the data about fiscal evasion, and then produced local stories based on it. So that project is basically the most important data journalism project ever produced. It even received the Pulitzer Prize. And so in my opinion, that's the largest example that we can think of. And let's go into data research. So data research. So one of the key questions is, where do I find the data on any topic? Like we mentioned early school living, and I mentioned Eurostat, right? How do I know that in Eurostat there is data about early school living? Well, I'm using my imagination, yes, also. But if you have no idea on where to find the data, there are a few techniques that we can use to find interesting data. So let's look into this. First of all, we need to look for preferably open data. It's not necessarily a requirement. So you can also find data into PDF files. But obviously, if the data is open, if it's on Excel or if it's like a table, that will make our life much easier, because we can immediately start playing with it using Google spreadsheet or using Excel. And then we can load it into the data visualization software. You can't load a PDF file into a data visualization software. That's in a nutshell, because a PDF file is, like an image. It's like a photo. In fact, if you try to copy and paste from a PDF file and put it into a Word file or into a text file, it's going to get very messy. I'm sure you tried. For the same reason, you can't just upload a PDF file into a data visualization software. So what we are looking for is open data. If we can't find open data and we find a PDF file, we'll have to transform it into open data anyways. So it's important to keep that in mind. And yeah, so this is just a quick notion about machine readable data. But where do we find the data? So I mentioned a couple of, there are a couple of places where I always go to find data. So one of them is Google Scholar. Maybe you already know it. If you have, for example, written a scientific paper or even a thesis during your studies, or even before your studies, maybe you used Google Scholar as a source of information, or also for your journalism. But what is it? It's like the best place to find academic research, peer-reviewed articles, more or less credible sources. It depends on the journal. Not all journals have the same credibility, by the way. But what you're going to find is a lot of material produced by researchers. And you can assume that researchers are putting a lot of time into their scientific work, and they publish data. And sometimes the problem is that there is too much data. So you need to sift through it. You need to, remove the one that you don't need, select it, and do all that kind of research within the research. but it's a fantastic place to find data. So Google Scholar is always one of the places I start with. You know, you can actually, let me actually share my entire screen. Well, I want to share my entire screen for 1 sec, just because I want to open a new tab and I want to show you Google Scholar. We mentioned early school living before. This is the typical scenario where I would start as a data journalist to look for material from the academic world that I can integrate into my story. And if you're going to click around here, you're going to find publications, books in all formats, and some of them mention statistics, and some of them report tables that you can extract and use into your data journalism. So it's a great place. People who already know it will have to excuse me if I'm repeating it, but it's a fantastic place to find data. So it's definitely worth it. There is another place called Google Advanced Search, which is this one. So Google Advanced Search will allow you to filter the results of Google. So you can, for example, put all the words, ensure that all the words are included into your results. You can exclude words, but also you can filter, by language. And then you can also check the date of publication. So let's say that you're looking for data from the past year. So you want recent data about something, you can put past year here. Site or domain. So if you already know that into a website there is data that you want to find, you can put here the domain name of that site. So for example, if you know that Eurostat will have some of the data, you can type down Eurostat, or you can actually put the full URL, which is this one. Then a very important filter to find data is file type. So you can actually download Excel files from Google. So this will filter out all the results except those that have this extension, which is the extension of Excel. And yeah, so it's a very interesting way to use Google, because if you use Google normally, you can also find data, but you have two additional tools. One is Scholar and one is Advanced Search to do more research, to do like a deeper research. Then what else? People ask me, okay, where can I find the data outside of Google? Because Google, I mean, everybody knows Google, right? But it's still a key tool for data research. However, there are other websites you can start from. So for example, the open data portals are a good way to go and look for data. Where do you find the open data portals? So some of them will be on ccan.org. ccan.org is the web page of the most common software for open data management, which was built by the Open Knowledge Foundation. And you can go on ccan.org and you're going to find a list of open data portals. Then with the experience, the more you practice data journalism and the more you're going to learn about places to find the data, you're going to know that, for example, the United Nations, they have like hundreds of offices. So each of them will have a data unit or a data section in their websites. Sometimes they have open data portals. So for example, I'll show you another one that I really like, UNHCR data. So UNHCR is the UN Refugee Agency. And they have a fantastic open data portal which is visible here. And here you're going to find an immense quantity of knowledge around the refugee phenomenon in the world. They also have, an open data portal that has interactive visualizations. You can click around, explore the data in specific countries, maybe the countries that have like the highest rates. So what I want to show you here is that there is the opposite problem. The problem is, how do you navigate through the data, because the data is too much. So in my opinion, it's a matter of experience. You start from a topic and then you start building your knowledge around that topic. And if you're covering migration, you're going to know all the most important data sources because you've done your research. And step by step, you're going to expand your map of open data portals and sources. My suggestion is to create your own Excel file with all the sources that you use in your activities. So, and then you can actually, for example, divide them by topic, by country, by language. You create your own database of data sources. So the key message here is that, wait, I'll go back to full screen. The key message here is that you're gonna find a lot of interesting lists of open data portals. You're gonna find a lot of custom solutions for your data research through Scholar, through advanced search, through your own networks. And then you create your own list. And this list then can be shared with your colleagues if you want, or you just keep it for yourself. Last but not least, there are these 6 links here that I put for you together into this list that are additional ways to find data. So for example, somebody put together this amazing public datasets list divided by category. It's on GitHub, so it's available to the public. Anyone can go, and it's divided in categories. So you go at economics. In economics, you have, each of these links will be an open data portal on a certain sector of the society. Education, energy, finance, GIS stands for Geographic Information System. Let me see the question. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing the link. Sometimes it's difficult to find ultra local data. I work for a local newspaper. That's very true. Sometimes, okay, so let's talk about ultra local data. So let's say I'm working for a local newspaper in the region of Tuscany in Italy. It depends. So each region, each city will have its own sources. There is no one single way to find data, but you can start from Google Scholar and Google Advanced Search, do a very deep dive into the data. Then you can actually try to reach out to the local, if it's a municipality or the local government, and you try to understand if they have the data. And that's a time-consuming process, because sometimes they don't answer you immediately. In some cases, you have to do a Freedom of Information Act kind of request, where this is available, and it's not available everywhere in the world. So if you have that law, they are kind of obliged to answer you. So you can do a FOIA request. What else can you do? Well, you need to do a deep dive. I think there's no way around it. You're gonna use one of these lists. You're gonna use one of the tools I showed you before. And if the data doesn't exist, then you go for other solutions. So you collect the data yourself. But if you go that way, it's gonna be a bit problematic because maybe you're not gonna collect the data in a unbiased way. So you need to be clear about the methodology of your data collection, and you need to be rigorous about it. Plus, if you are not doing a proper social data research, another thing you can do, you can add a methodological note in your story and explain that the data that you got is partial and it comes from XYZ, maybe because you interviewed, I don't know, 65 people, and maybe the community has like 5,000 people. So your sample is too small to be representative of reality. There are a lot of challenges about data collection that you need to keep in mind. So my suggestion in that case is to join forces with a statistician who will help you with the data collection. But obviously, this means that the story will take a long time to be produced. But it's possible. Another thing that you want to take a look at is this list. So this list is a full-on list of national statistical offices in all the countries of the world. So if you're covering foreign affairs, it will be useful because, I don't know, maybe you need the Lithuanian statistical office, you find it here. Then, you know, the language would be, if you're not Lithuanian, will be a challenge. Some of them have an English version. If not, you can use Google Translate and try to navigate through the website. Or you join forces with a Lithuanian journalist, and then that person will help you with the language. But it's true, the data is not available in the same way and to the same extent everywhere. So there are places where there is no data. So you need to get it in different ways, or you need to be creative about it. Okay, let's see if there are other. I'll quickly stop sharing. How do you know the data is 100% reliable? First of all, I will never know if it's 100% reliable. There's always a margin of error, but there is a checklist that you can use to evaluate the kind of reliability of a data set. So number one, you need to know everything about the methodology behind the data. Well, first thing first, you need to know the source. That's obvious, but you need to know the source. So you need to know who's behind the source. Is it the Institute of Statistics of a certain country, or is it somebody else? Sometimes the data comes from an NGO, and the NGO, you know, that will have an agenda. So you might actually feel that there might be, you know, a pushed message there that you need to be aware of as a journalist. So your role as a journalist is actually this one, to deem a data set reliable or not. So knowing the source, number one. Number two, reading the methodology behind the data set to understand, for example, if the sample is representative or not, like how many people were surveyed to come to that conclusion, for example. Is it a small sample, like 100 out of 1,000,000, or it's a proper survey with like several thousands of people from different cities and different age groups? So you need to know a little bit of statistics to evaluate a data set. But yeah, you need to do a little bit of background research before using a data set in case you feel like that could be flawed or skewed or biased. With experience, you get to know like the data sources that you use in your daily life. So sometimes you can actually make the assumption that a data source is solid because they have a very strong reputation, and you can say, well, I assume the data is correct. But if you have time, you can always stress test the data you find, and you can start reading the methodology. You can start challenging the data. For example, you can interview the authors of the data, ask them about it. If they have a strong statistical team, then maybe the data is correct. And if they are like transparent with their methodology. But no data reflects the truth in any way. The data is always a simplification of reality. So keep that in mind. That's why I suggest to combine it with on-the-ground reportage, because you have data and then you have human stories. You put them together, and you kind of mitigate these risks. But do you agree that data is always a simplification of reality? Because, for example, a map, we're going to have an entire session on maps in 2 weeks' time. I'll show you some maps that are based on real data, but they are visualized in a way that is deceiving and misleading. So even reliable data can be backfiring or can be misleading people. So it's very subtle. There are a few rules that you can follow as rules of thumb that will help you a little bit. But keep in mind that the data is always in some way partial. It's not a perfect science. Okay, thanks for the question. That was a very a complex question, but a very intelligent one also. So I'll go back into the presentation. So you're gonna have all these links. You can take a look with more time. I didn't mention Google Public Data Explorer, but some people love it. I never use it, to be honest, but I put it here because I feel like a lot of other data journalists use it. It's a sort of Google for data. So it's like a third tool that Google offers to find data. It works well, but it's more or less similar to Google Advanced Search. And sometimes I get these kind of results that are a bit strange. So, for example, if I put early school leaving, yeah, not the best results, but yeah, I mean, you have to start very broadly and then narrow down. That's what you have to do. You have to use all the sources and then narrow down and find the ones you are comfortable with. Well, in this case, worked quite well. So I put early school leaving Greece, and I got some interesting data sets. However, these are from tradingeconomics.com. Not entirely sure about it. So what I'm doing here, I'm looking for the original source. Yeah, it's written here. So it's Eurostat. So for example, you start from Google Data Explorer or Google Scholar or Google Advanced Search. You end up on a website like Trading Economics. You start looking for the original source, in this case, Eurostat. Then you go on Eurostat and search inside Eurostat for the original data set. And you know that Eurostat is absolutely solid. I'm sure they make mistakes too, but they're solid. They have a fully fledged team. They work with national institutes all across Europe. It's a very important data source for European statistics. So early leavers from education and training, there you go. Data extracted in May 2024. They're planning an update in May 2025. So it's super recent, a month ago. And then you start digging here, and you need to spend time. You need to spend an hour, 2 hours, maybe even a day or 2 days to read all about it. You create your own knowledge about it. and then you select the data sets that you want to include into your stories. There you go. This is the typical data research situation where you have a topic in mind, you start looking for the data, and then, in a few steps, you get to the original source. This one is like the full Excel file, and we're going to see next week how to use the Excel file and how to visualize it. But in terms of data research, this is what you do. Okay. And I feel like you didn't really see what I've done. I'll show you. Let me quickly. I need to show the entire process I was doing. So full screen share. So what I did is I was looking for data about early school living. So I started from Google Scholar, then I moved into Google Public Data Research. I put early school living here. I couldn't find anything. Then I used this other tool, Google Dataset Search. I put early school living, and then I added also the name of a country. And I found the trading economics links. So for some reason, this tool is just giving me 3 sources, all of them from trading economics. I click here, then I scroll down, and I find Eurostat. So I understand that this data comes from Eurostat. Then I go again on Google and I put Eurostat early school living, and I find the data. Here you have like the entire encyclopedia about early school living. You spend 1 or 2 days, or maybe half a day if you have time. And then you go on the table section. You can start downloading all the Excel files from here. Is this clear? Did you see the kind of journey? It's a typical journey to find data. Let me see if it's clear or not. I hope it is. Okay. Data cleaning. So do you remember what data cleaning is all about? We're going to have more time next week to talk about it. But it's basically what you do when you download an Excel file, like the one I downloaded from Eurostat. So this data here, well, I mean, you could actually use this chart, but the design of it is not the best, right? So I think what we want to do, we would like to revisualize it in a way that looks good in our newspaper. And I don't encourage you to use Excel or numbers to do that. I encourage you to use Data Wrapper. That will be the subject of next week session. So how do you move from this massive amount of data to the charts that you include into your reportage? First of all, you need to clean the data. So you need to eliminate all you don't need. You need to select the numbers that you want to visualize. You need to clean the data set, and then you need to load it into a data visualization software. And then you need to do the entire design thinking about the data. How do you incorporate it into your story? Which insights you want to showcase? And all that will be done by, first of all, cleaning the data, and then loading into the tool that I mentioned many times, which is called Data Wrapper. This is the tool. So you load your clean data set into this, and you create all sorts of visualizations. Like, for example, line charts. You get a full menu to choose from to create all sorts of visualizations. All this without coding. So each of these visualizations that are just examples can be adapted for your topic if you have the data, and then included into your magazine or newspaper or website. Up to you, it depends on where you want to put it. It's used also by non-journalists. So, for example, academic researchers are using Data Wrapper to visualize their data. Each of these charts can tell a different story. Sometimes you have one data set and you're visualizing it in different ways to tell different stories. And yeah, so let me show you quickly, just to motivate you a bit more, the section on maps, because I mentioned that we're going to do some maps, and the maps are these three types: choropleth, symbol, and locator maps. Choropleth map looks like this. And obviously, we're going to do like an analysis of charts. A chart or a map is not just about the chart itself. It's also about what some information designer calls scaffolding, which is the title, the notes, the legend, all these kind of labels and arrows. These are elements that help the reader to understand the meaning of your chart. Like, what do they need to focus on? And Data Wrapper will allow you to customize all this without a big effort. Okay, let me show you the other type of maps. So this is the symbol map. So instead of having regions, you have like bubbles and icons on it. So these are bound to points, not to regions. And the larger the marker is, the higher the number is associated to that marker. And then finally, there is another. This is the newest type of map that Data Wrapper allows you to create. It's more or less like a illustrated map. So it will show where something happened or is located with this kind of map. This map is not necessarily based on data. It's more or less an illustration, but useful in certain situations. So the second and the third sessions will be very practical. Next week, we're going to look into data cleaning and then hopefully make a chart together. Then the third session in 2 weeks' time will be on maps. So we're going to do a lot of geographic data visualization. And then the last one, again, it's going to be a recap, maybe a practical session, and we're going to talk about how charts can lie. So a lot of interesting examples of like skewed data visualizations, problematic maps, mistakes made by other media. Some are mistakes, some are not mistakes, but are like deliberate mistakes because they wanted to show a story and they skewed the visualization. Fantastic. So Well, we've started our journey together today. I hope I'm going to see you all again next week. I can tell you again what we're going to do. Charts next week, maps the week after, and then wrap up and talk more about the philosophy of data journalism